Hey there, here we are. Welcome to FFRF's Ask an Atheist on Facebook Live. I'm Dan Barker. I'm co-president of the Freedom from Religion Foundation, and Andrew's here.
Hi, Dan. I'm Andrew Seidel. I'm FFRF's Director of Strategic Response, one of our, I don't know, how many attorneys do we have? 3,000 now? 10? Something like, somewhere in between those two, I think.
Between 10 and 3,000.
Yeah, something like that.
Hey, Andrew.
Cheers, everybody.
So, Andrew, when's the last time we actually saw each other in person? It's been like 3 weeks now, maybe, or something?
Oh, I think it's been longer than that. I think it's been, I think for us, it's been in more than a month before St. Patrick's Day, if memory serves me. Because I went, if you remember, the strategic response team went remote a little bit earlier than some of the other folks in the office to kind of test it out and see what we at FFRF needed to do to make it work for the rest of the team.
So Annie Laurie was also going to be on today's show, but she's really busy doing something else right at this moment, so she couldn't join us. But Andrew, tell the viewers how they can ask questions in during today's show.
Well, I mean, the best thing to do is to just ask a question right in the comments. And then you can always ask questions, whether we are live or whether you just all of a sudden get a question throughout the week at askanatheist@ffrf.org. So you can just send an email to askanatheist@ffrf.org, and we will read your questions on the air. You can include your name or not. And, you know, I think tomorrow is the National Ask an Atheist Day. So, you know, if you've got questions or you hear questions that you couldn't answer on Ask an Atheist Day, send them our way and we will take care of those on next week's episode of Ask an Atheist.
So in a few minutes, we're going to see a really fun Betty Bowers video, a brand new one that Andrew Bradley has written. And it's called, what's it called? Stay the Hell at Home. So we'll be watching that.
Thou shalt stay the hell home.
Thou shalt stay the hell at home. But before that, there's a lot to talk about. Today is April 15th, which was supposed to be tax day, but I guess that's been postponed. I did my taxes. I'm not going to ask you, Andrew, but we finally got ours in.
And let's not say that publicly. Everybody should check to see if taxes are still due or not. Don't take advice from a Facebook Live video, especially tax advice. Right.
In any event, it doesn't hurt to get them done.
My lawyer had them.
But do you remember 1 month ago, exactly, March the 15th, which was a Sunday, what happened on that day?
It was the Ides of March. I believe that was the day that Donald Trump declared National Day of Prayer to stop the spread of COVID, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right.
I don't think it worked out that well.
So by that time, Trump started to notice that there was a problem. There were almost 100 deaths in the United States, so you couldn't ignore that. So Trump had this National Day of Prayer for the virus. And today, there are more than 26,000 U.S. deaths. I mean, that's very sad, and our heart goes out to people who have suffered from this. But it's pretty obvious that the prayer had no effect at all. In fact, we could argue that prayer has the opposite effect, because if you believe God's going to protect you, you're more likely to go to church and not stay at home.
Yes, if you believe you're covered in the blood of Jesus, for instance, you might be more willing to expose yourself and therefore others to the disease, which I think we'll see a little clip of that later on.
Yeah, so here's a pastor who is a good example of why people should stay at home. This is a Virginia, Richmond area, Virginia, evangelical Pentecostal pastor who died last Saturday night on the eve of Easter. He said that we believe in God for healing, and that God is larger than this dreaded virus of COVID. He believed in the power of prayer and the blood of Jesus. He and his wife both became ill. Very sad. and he died Saturday night. And the church is called the New Deliverance Community Church in the Richmond area. New Deliverance Evangelistic Church. And he was the first black chaplain of that community's police department. And the next morning, of course, on Easter morning, the church elder, Brian Nevers, had to announce to the congregation that their pastor had died from the coronavirus. He said, "We still believe in God for healing right now. Our bishop has always told us." Even as they wheeled him into the operating room, he proclaimed that God is still a healer. I don't know how, but I have to say, God will get the glory from this. So, they never lose, do they? When something happens good, God gets the praise, and when something bad happens, God gets the glory. But.
No, I mean, and this is a preventable tragedy too. That's the saddest part about this. I mean, it is absolutely foreseeable that if in the middle of a pandemic you go out and gather and pass around a collection plate and shake hands and do all the things that are going to spread the virus, or even go to a church and go into the communal bathrooms, for instance. I mean, there are thousands and thousands of ways this virus can spread. It does not respect holy ground. It does not respect the boundaries of churches. I mean, it was so foreseeable and so preventable, and that is, I think, the great tragedy of this. And I mean, we've seen a lot of data to show how church gatherings are spreading this pandemic. I mean, in Sacramento County, California, 1/3 of all the cases are tied to church gatherings. In South Korea, 60% of all the cases were tied to one church cluster. One worshiper who attended 2 worship services infected 1,200 other people in South Korea. I mean, so this is foreseeable and preventable, and religion is killing people.
Yeah, spreading the love of God in person. It's science that's saving people. So, the whole idea that prayer would make a difference. Trump thinks prayer is going to make a difference. And of course, evangelical leaders think it will make a difference, when we know the data shows us that it does not. And in fact, on Easter Sunday itself, last Sunday, many churches in the South were damaged by horrible storms, including some tornadoes that blew through. Here's a church in Tennessee that on Easter morning, on Easter day, that church was destroyed by a tornado that caved it in, and the people are scratching their heads saying, well, God's gonna get glorified somehow from all this. We're gonna have to rebuild. This was in Bradley County, not too far from Dayton, Tennessee, by the way. The pastor, Dennis Hicks, is called the Church of Jesus Christ on Benton Pike. So, storms are no respecter of persons. Viruses are no respecter of persons. But then down in Alabama, a few miles south, down in Dora, Alabama, they were praising God because look what happened. A tornado hit this church. It's called the Lawler Missionary Baptist Church. And it damaged the roof of the church. And then it knocked down these 2 crosses that were on either side of the cross of Jesus that were outside of the front of the church there. And all over Facebook, and all the believers are saying, praise God, look at this great miracle that happened. The tornado hit, but it left the center cross intact. So what does that tell you? Is that a sign of God's power?
Well, I mean, we kind of see this a lot in the wake of tornadoes and tragedies. I mean, just a couple weeks ago, before really the pandemic took off, there was that tragedy in Nashville when all those tornadoes struck Nashville. 26 people died. And you have Franklin Graham tweeting about how some first responders found a Bible intact in a house that had been ripped down. I mean, presumably they're stepping over dead bodies to find this intact Bible, and they're talking about it as though it's a miracle, and 26 people died. Now, you don't have quite the same thing here, but I mean, knocking over 2 out of 3 crosses, whether or not the one that represents Jesus is still up, is not the kind of message that I would be saying the weather supports my God as a result of it.
Well, wouldn't we trade that Bible for one of those lives? I mean, if God's going to save something. So, but to counter the rejoicing over that cross of Jesus that was left standing, let's look at a church about 60 miles north of there in Priceville, Alabama. This is what is it called? It's the Shoal Creek, Shoal, Shoal Creek Baptist Church in Priceville, Alabama. Just a week after the governor had issued a stay-at-home order, the pastor said, well, then let's have a worship service on Easter, but just stay in your cars out in the parking lot. So they did. Sunday morning, they had their Easter service. They stayed in their cars in the parking lot. And then about an hour after the church service ended on Sunday, lightning struck that steeple. And look what happened. The steeple caught fire. It struck the cross. So what does that say? What does that say to those people who are praising Jesus for the cross remaining standing a few miles away? And then this one here, is this a worse Baptist church than the others? Is that an act of God, or what is that? Of course, it's very sad. And the pastor was quoted saying, well, the governor's order to stay at home actually protected us, because there would have been people in that building except for her order. So praise God that the governor ordered to stay at home, so those people would not have been hurt.
Well, and I mean, that's frustrating too, because it wasn't religion that saved those worshipers. It was public policy that was based on science and data and reason, not religion, not public policy that says, let's just pray this away. It was public policy based on science and medicine that saved those people and told them to stay home. And, I mean, we can go back quite a bit farther and think about how many people in churches science has saved. The old way to prevent lightning from striking steeples in churches way back when. Dan, do you remember what it was? What the methodology?
Well, it was prayer, wasn't it? Or was there a specific thing?
It was a specific kind of prayer. They would actually baptize church bells in water from the River Jordan, and then ring the church bells to prevent them from getting hit by lightning, because they had that special baptism by Jordan River water. So what you had was, during the middle of thunderstorms, people, bell ringers, standing at the bottom of this basically tower, the tallest tower in town, with two big hunks of metal at the top, and these bell ringers connected to it. So hundreds of them were getting electrocuted. I think there was I actually talk about this in the Founding Myth a little bit. From 1750 to 1785, somewhere thereabouts, like 120 bell ringers died from electrocution. And of course, what stopped that was Ben Franklin's lightning rod. That was what actually stopped this, and that was held as, impiety. That invention, it was a sacrilegious invention, because Franklin stole the thunderbolt from God. John Adams actually had to defend him from that attack.
So that reminds me of the poem that Yip Harburg wrote. Yip Harburg, the lyricist who wrote Somewhere Over the Rainbow and It's Only a Paper Moon. He wrote a bunch of light verse, and we have a book. We published a book of his light verse, and one of those was, I think it's called Strike Three. It says, when lightning struck the steeple of the Church of San Jose, it barely missed the brothel that was just across the way. So
that's pretty good. And so I want to read real quick Founding Myth, page 63 and 64. I talk a little bit. So this is what Abbe Nolet, the man of the church, he said that it was impious to ward off heaven's lightnings. It was as impious to do that as for a child to ward off the chastening rod of its father. And so John Adams rushed to Franklin's defense and said that Franklin's lightning rods have met, quote, with all the opposition from superstition, affectation of piety, and jealousy of new inventions that inoculation to prevent the danger of smallpox and all other useful discoveries have met with in all ages of the world. So talking about religion and how religion opposes progress oftentimes, pretty good stuff.
So that plea to impiety is actually an acknowledgement that God is punishing those people, and we shouldn't stop God from punishing us. It really is an act of God, is what they're saying.
Yep. And go ahead.
Well, then didn't the governor of New York say something similar about that? That
He
it's not
did.
prayer.
Yeah, so Governor Cuomo, stepping into what I think we could call a leadership vacuum, was on CNN yesterday and speaking with Allison Camerata, and he had some wise and truthful words. It was refreshing to hear. Let's take a listen, Bruce.
Our behavior has stopped the spread of the virus. God did not stop the spread of the virus. And what we do, how we act, will dictate how that virus spreads.
You could see the look on her face when he said that. She's kind of like, what do I say to that? But wasn't
really
that
nice
refreshing?
It was.
Yeah.
It was absolutely refreshing.
Of course, he's not saying he doesn't believe in God. He's just saying we need to use human efforts. I think most believers are smart enough to know, even if there is a God, we got to do our human best with science and reason.
I mean, I believe Cuomo's a devout Catholic, though he doesn't agree with the church on most of its political stances, as I understand it. But I certainly don't want to speak for him.
Well, he's right. God didn't stop the virus. In fact, belief in God was contributing to it, as we see with these churches and these people ignoring the stay-at-home order. So, in fact, God doesn't stop viruses. If you read the Bible, God himself is actually responsible for creating the plagues, the pestilences. And in my book, God, the Most Unpleasant Character in All Fiction, I have a whole chapter called Pestilential, which shows verse after verse of God threatening pestilence and plague. And you can't scroll that, can you, Bruce? That's just the top of it. There's like 50 more verses below that, all through the Bible, saying God saying, I'm going to punish you with this, and then the illness and the boils and the plagues and the pestilences are going to come upon you. So really, if a virus comes, it really is God's fault. And if you're going to use the impiety argument, they actually ought not to be doing anything to stop it because we deserve it.
And I mean, it's interesting how indiscriminate God appears to be in the Bible with so many of his punishments. So many innocent people get swept up in his punishments. And that is a point that our friend Betty Bowers made in her latest clip, Thou Shalt Stay the Hell Home, written by FFRF's good friend Andrew Bradley, performed by Devin Green, who is Betty Bowers, America's best Christian TM. Let's take a look.
I'm Mrs. Betty Bowers, America's best Christian. Trademark. As such, I get to tell lesser Christians, that would be you, what you're doing to annoy Jesus. Oh goodness, where to start? Oh, I know. How about Christians who continue to crowd into churches during a global pandemic? No, don't smite them just yet, Jesus. Yeah, me too, but at least allow the mercy of me warning them first. Oh, stop. Maybe you've seen the video of the woman driving to church saying she isn't worried about getting sick because
I'm covered in Jesus' blood.
Just think of her dry cleaning bills. Okay, but first of all, if you want to reassure people you're healthy, particularly mentally, the technique of telling them you're covered in blood needs a little work. But that same woman said she goes to the grocery store every day. So maybe this is not about being so devout you have to go to church, but being so selfish you have to do whatever the hell you want, no matter whom you kill.
I love Betty Bowers.
She's always great. Yeah. Well, Andrew, too, who writes it. Another brilliant Andrew. So, by the way, she mentioned pestilence, and I forgot to mention earlier that if you want to see all the list of the biblical pestilences that God inflicted on the human race, you can see that whole list at the website Unpleasant God, that's one word, unpleasantgod.ffrf.org.
And that comes from your book, God, Most Unpleasant Character in All of Fiction.
That's right.
That's just based on that famous Dawkins line from the God Delusion, correct?
Yeah, and Pestilential is just one of 28 chapters, including infanticidal and genocidal and aborticidal and slave mongering and so on. So before we do the positive new video, which will be a lot of fun, should we do questions now? Are you set
I think
up for...
we should, especially because we're getting some that are kind of on this topic, and I think we'll end with that positive video. So Dan C asked via email, is it constitutional for a governor to ban church gatherings during this outbreak? Yes, Dan, it is.
Yeah. I mean, even the Bible says to Christians, be subject to every ordinance of man. So like building codes and fire codes, churches can't ignore those things because they think it would interfere with their religious freedom.
And people should know FFRF wrote a letter to every single governor in the country pointing this out. We also have launched a resources page for you to take action. So this is the COVID resources page. It's on the FFRF website. And it actually has a memo that explains the law that you can download and you can send to government officials either in your state or in your local government that are exempting churches from stay-at-home orders or that are not enforcing stay-at-home orders against churches. I mean, the bottom line is that every right that we have under the Constitution, except the right to think freely, is limited in some way. I mean, the right to freedom of speech doesn't include the right to slander another person or to threaten another person. You can't even politic within a certain radius of a polling location. The right to assemble doesn't include the right to go onto somebody's private property and assemble. All of our rights are limited in some way, and that includes the right to worship. And the right to worship most certainly does not include the right to risk other citizens' lives. And that is what these churches and these preachers are asking to do. They are asking for the right to endanger everyone else's life, and they do not have that right. So it is absolutely constitutional for governors to place temporary bans on gatherings and have those bans apply to churches as well during a pandemic. And by the way, the Supreme Court has been reasonably clear about these issues for a long time. And all of that is laid out in the letters that we've written.
And in these days, with remote working, they can still assemble for their services, as many churches are wisely doing. They are assembling remotely. I think a lot of Christians are smart enough to know that, and most of them are, obviously. So another question?
We do. Greg Roden says, what do you think about the judge who allowed drive in at a little church, saying if they didn't, that it was criminalizing Easter? I don't know. Dan, did you see this one by any chance?
So we lost about 5 seconds of your question.
Oh, okay. Let me read. I'll reread it. Greg Roden said, what do you think about the judge who allowed drive-in services at a Louisville church, saying if they didn't, that it was criminalizing Easter? So this was Judge Justin Walker out of Kentucky. And he wrote, this is a quote from the case, from his opinion. On Holy Thursday, an American mayor criminalized the communal celebration of Easter, which is just wrong. I mean, Judge Walker had his official investiture on March 16th, so he was just took to the bench. He was rated as unqualified by the ABA because he has no experience with trials. He's never tried a case as the lead or co-counsel, whether civil or criminal. So he's no courtroom experience. He's pretty unfit to be a judge. Another one of Trump and McConnell's judges who's not fit. And he's already been nominated by Trump to serve on the DC circuit after being unqualified and unfit and only serving for a few months. The opinion itself is just, it's bonkers. I mean, it's bloviating, it's hyperbolic, it's full of historical revisionism and Christian nationalism, and is flat out wrong. I think the most amazing thing about the opinion, I guess I should have backed up. I'm sorry, I just launched right into this because I've been thinking about it a lot lately. So basically, Kentucky has a stay-at-home order, and one of these churches said, well, we're going to have drive-in services and everybody will stay in their car. And that's a creative way for us to still get together and abide by the stay-at-home order. And the mayor of Louisville said, I would really urge you to stay at home. And so the church turned around and sued and said, we get to worship and the mayor of Louisville can't stop us. And the church sued the city and sued the mayor. And the judge, without waiting to hear from the mayor or the city, decided in favor of the church. Without waiting to hear from them is an amazing miscarriage of justice. I mean, that rarely ever happens. And that's completely because of his inexperience in the courtroom, which is compounded by this conservative political streak that trumps any notions of judicial restraint. So Justin Walker wrote this opinion that he goes all the way back to the Pilgrims. I mean, it's 20 pages. It's got 86 footnotes, citations to the Bible, research on the Pilgrims and their journey. So clearly a lot of time went into this. If he had that kind of time, he should have simply asked the city. And what he would have found out is that, first of all, the city doesn't have an order in place. So the church couldn't sue the city because the city had taken no official act. The church should have sued the governor. And second, that the city wanted this order to apply to the church because there's all this photographic evidence of the church violating the social distancing orders in its previous drive-in services. So they were passing around the collection plate. People were hanging out of the windows of their car, giving elbows instead of high fives. So that they weren't abiding by any of the social distancing orders in the first place. But the judge didn't know any of this information because he just went ahead and issued his opinion, came out right off the bench, 2 Christian nationalist barrels blazing without bothering to hear what was actually going on. He just relied on the affidavit of the preacher of this church. So big mistake there. Terrible, terrible opinion. Not a fit judge to sit on the bench, certainly not on the DC circuit. So that was a really long-winded answer. I apologize. I feel passionately about this. Dan, I should let you say something. Sorry.
Well, no, that's good. I mean, that's useful information. It shows what we're in for with these judge appointments. But it reminded me that when the Pilgrims, as he referred to, invaded this continent, they landed here right in the middle of the largest, most deathly pandemic really in history. More than 90% of the native population of this continent was killed off by diseases that the Pilgrims themselves brought. So they didn't know that, of course. Governor Winthrop, got up and prayed and gave thanks to God for clearing the land for his people to build their city on the hill. So pandemics are nothing new, but really it was the Christians, mainly Christian Europeans, who caused that massive death of my ancestors, by the way. I'm a surviving member of one of those tribes.
And I mean, the striking thing about that too is, and I think this goes with what you're saying, this judge confuses and conflates persecution with religious freedom, which is what he does when he's talking about the Pilgrims. The Pilgrims, yes, they were fleeing religious persecution, but they weren't coming to establish religious freedom. They came to establish their own little theocracies, and they succeeded in doing that. They imposed their religion on everybody in their sphere of influence that they could, using the secular law. The secular and theocratic law were one, and church law were one and the same. It was a theocracy. And this judge conflates religious persecution with the ability to not exercise your religion as freely as you would like right now, because there's a pandemic sweeping the nation and killing thousands and thousands of people. So just a truly, truly bad decision that was, in my mind, clearly an audition for a Trumpian Supreme Court. But I've gotten on my soapbox for long enough about that. So Casey Summers asks, did you see how the credit card companies cut off Jim Bakker because he was promoting a scam miracle drug for COVID-19? Do you think this will be happening with other televangelists? So just a quick bit of background. Jim Bakker, televangelist. I believe he was promoting like a silver something solution that would stop the spread that would keep people safe from COVID. One of the state's attorney generals, I believe it was Arkansas, but don't quote me on that, actually went after him for fraud as a result of this. But I didn't see that the credit card companies cut him off too. Dan, any thoughts on this?
Well, it's not just believers. There's all sorts of scam artists and people trying to take advantage of other people's misfortune and selling really snake oil today. And it's part and parcel of it. The religious irrationality combined with basic human credibility and credulity and irrationality. There are hucksters out there, and of course, who are better examples than the televangelists?
Well, and so Michael Fogler asks a question that's a good follow-up for that, for Dan here. What's a good argument against the idea that God gets all the credit for good things and none of the blame for any of the bad things? So Dan, you've had almost 250 debates now? I don't know, too many.
No. Not that many, 137.
Okay, so almost 150 debates now. So you must have a go-to answer for this.
Well, wait, I don't know if I understand the question. What's a good argument
against the idea that... Yeah, so God gets all the credit, but none of the blame. What's the best argument that you've seen against that?
Well, of course, I think if you read the Bible itself, God also takes credit for the evils. If you actually go to the Bible itself, you'll see that God describes his own actions as evil. So I guess Christians could say, yeah, God gets the credit for everything, including evil, because he created it, he said. He caused it. He committed it. And if you look in the Bible up the words evil and wicked, all through both Testaments, very rarely do they have anything to do with like what you and I would call moral evil, how we treat other human beings, how we take care of each other. It almost always deals with offending the deity, offending God, like offending daddy. So, of course, he gets the credit, and they don't like to use the word blame, but I think God would even say himself in the Bible, yeah, I'll take the blame. I did this. I created this pestilence. So blame me. I'm God. You can blame me as much as you want to. There's something in human nature, though, that makes people want to bow down and revere and glorify the Father. And he's good, no matter what he does. Even when he does bad stuff, he's good. And that's actually kind of the topic of the next book I'm working on, called The End of Worship.
Oh, very exciting. Nice teaser there.
It'll be about a year from now.
Well, let's this might be in line with that. Marie Lewis asks, if they had found an intact Quran after that tornado, would they still say it was a sign from God?
Well, the Muslims would.
If they found it in a church, that would be pretty interesting. Let's see. Yeah. Another question. Doug Roberts says, maybe we need to be thankful that the coronavirus doesn't fit comfortably within the 7 bowls of Revelation. Dan, do you want to jump onto the 7 bowls of Revelation?
7 bowls? I don't remember the 7, B-O-W-L-S?
B-O-W-L-S, yes.
The 7 bowls of Revelation, the threats and the curses of God that are coming in the end time.
Is this where he pours out his wrath from bowls or something like that?
You know, I mean, we kind of ignored Revelation when I was an evangelical. It was, even then I thought it was written by somebody who was smoking too many mushrooms, it's just or eating too many mushrooms. But yeah, it doesn't seem to fit, does it?
No, I mean, I think I refer to it in the Founding Myth as literary acid trip, which it really is just a bizarre book. So we got another question here. Dan C says, in Detroit, the cops stopped an abortion clinic protester because of the stay-at-home order. He sued and the government caved, so he's back out there harassing patients. Is there any legal way to stop these guys? And I should say there's a similar case going on in North Carolina right now. Some abortion protesters just sued a county for the same reason here.
Well, they have a right, I guess, to be reasonably on the sidewalk. And as long as they're not violating any ordinances, new or old, they have that right. But if they are interfering, of course, with people's access, you notice, talking about abortion, that some states are taking advantage of the virus to shut down abortion clinics and deny access to women being able to go. Is an abortion clinic an essential service? Many people would say yes, but some lawmakers are saying no, it's not essential, so we need to shut it down.
And we're seeing a lot of cases working their way up, and things are happening so fast in this area. And again, remember, as we've talked about on this program quite a bit before, there are a lot of judges that are looking to tee up a case to go to the Supreme Court, and a lot of activist attorneys and anti-abortion groups out there that are looking to tee up a case to the Supreme Court. And one of these could theoretically be it. Eric Hawken asks, do you think the federal government giving aid to churches can be stopped in today's right-wing courts? So just so people know what Eric is talking about, in the COVID stimulus package that just came out, the Paycheck Relief Program and some of the other relief allows small businesses, nonprofits, charities, including churches, to get forgivable loans from the government, so they can borrow money, pay their salaries, pay their mortgage, things like that, and then the government will forgive the balance of that loan later on. And they have specifically said, they being the Small Business Administration, which is in charge of administering these loans, has specifically said that churches are eligible for this, which means that you, the American taxpayer, are going to be paying preachers' salaries and church mortgages, which is 100% without a doubt unconstitutional. It's a violation of your religious liberty. It's a violation of the First Amendment. It is one of the original reasons that we have a separation of state and church in this country.
But his question was, is it winnable?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What do you? And in the courts is a different question. I mean, I have very little faith in this particular Supreme Court. But Dan, what do you think in terms of stopping it?
Well, it seems to me, if I were arguing the other side, I would do the same thing as the church taxation issue, that as long as the churches are not favored, as long as the churches are a small part of a larger group, that they're not being singled out in any way. And if I were arguing for the other side, I would say, well, if other nonprofits can do this, why would not? All nonprofits are not paying taxes. Our organization is not paying taxes. So I think it would be a hard case. It might not be that hard to argue, but it might be really hard to win because of that. Kind of like the Trinity Lutheran case, where the church was. We think that was a bad decision, by the way, that the church could get state money. But the courts went along with this idea that the churches are just a small part of a larger group that are getting this benefit. So that might be a tough one to win.
And that is the argument that the other side is making. Essentially, they're saying, look, you to not give us this money would discriminate against us, which is fundamentally not true. And that's because we treat churches differently all the time under our law. They are treated specially. For instance, churches don't have to file any financial disclosures or financial information with the IRS. Every other nonprofit in the country has to do that. So we're going to be giving hundreds of thousands, millions, who knows how much money to churches with no accountability or transparency whatsoever. In fact, the first time the IRS might be hearing that this church even exists is when they apply for these forgivable loans, and they will probably never hear from them again afterwards. So I mean, this is just a disaster waiting to happen. And the bottom line is, it's not discrimination against churches because they are treated differently. And this is a religious freedom issue. And I really want to stress that. I think it's important for everybody to understand. You, as the American taxpayer, have a right not to be taxed in a way that violates your religious liberty, right? The government cannot wield its coercive taxing power to take your money and then give it to a church that, for instance, tells you you're going to go to hell. They can't take Muslim taxpayers' money and then turn around and give it to Jewish synagogues. They can't take a Christian taxpayer's money and turn around and give it to a Muslim imam to pay his salary. Right? This goes back to the founding of our republic. It is a basic tenet of American constitutional law. The first religious freedom law written in this country, the Virginia Statute on Religious Freedom, in it, Thomas Jefferson and James Madison said that it is sinful and tyrannical for the taxing power to be employed that way. Sinful and tyrannical. That's what we're up against right now. And
so
FFRF
Andrew,
is doing everything it can to stop it, but it's going to be a hard fight.
So Andrew, you could start your own church, call it the Raggedy Andrew Church, where you could make sure that there's social distancing between.
All right.
Dan,
you're going to give our viewers nightmares now.
Well, you could pay yourself a salary. You could tell the IRS, hey, you're a new church, pay your kids. And what's to stop you from doing that? Because there's no accountability among churches.
Yeah, I mean, if I did not have scruples or principles or morals, life would be a lot easier and my bank account would be a lot fuller. There's no doubt about that. But maybe, Dan, I want to end on the positive note, the video that you and our talented cartoonist did. We're out of questions, so I think we should move to that and close out.
So we'll let Annie Laurie introduce this video. Fish fly replete in depth of June, dawdling away their watery noon, ponder deep wisdom, dark or clear, each secret fishy hope or fear. Fish say they have their stream and pond, but is there anything beyond? This life cannot be all they swear, for how unpleasant if it were. One may not doubt that somehow good shall come of water and of mud, and sure the reverent eye must see a purpose in liquidity. We darkly know, by faith we cry, the future is not wholly dry. Mud unto mud, death eddies near, not here the appointed end, not here. But somewhere beyond space and time is wetter water, slimier slime, and there they trust there swimmeth one who swam ere rivers were begun. Immense of fishy form and mind, squamous, omnipotent and kind, and under that almighty fin the littlest fish may enter in. Oh, never fly conceals a hook, fish say, in the eternal brook. But more than mundane weeds are there, and mud, celestially fair. Fat caterpillars drift around, and paradisal grubs are found. Unfading moths, immortal flies, and the worm that never dies. And in that heaven of all their wish, there shall be no more land, save fish. So we actually didn't get to explain that. Bruce showed the actual video without Annie Laurie's introduction. But Rupert Brooke was a British poet. He wrote that poem in 1913. He died very young in the First World War. And Richard Dawkins, the biologist who wrote The God Delusion, said that that poem was his father's favorite poem, and one of his as well. So Rupert Brooke is dead, but he lives on through this really charming idea of what is heaven from the point of view of a fish. So
one of the only ways we can actually live on after death, through the written word.
Yeah, or through architecture, maybe, or through art, or through our children. Yeah. So is that it for today?
That's it for today. That's all the questions we have. I hope everybody is staying home and staying sane and staying safe. But we'll definitely be back for another episode of Ask an Atheist next week. Please join us.